come to order. We are convened as of 12 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. I would respectfully ask everyone attending this meeting to mute yourself unless you are recognized to speak. I will now call the roll. First Vice Chair Catlin.
Here.
Second Vice Chair Geisinger.
Here.
Secretary Guzman.
I am present.
Treasurer Bouquet.
Present.
And this is Chair Eric Davidson speaking. I am here as well. For the sake of the record, I see that we are also joined by Director Tisdale. Thank you for joining us, sir. Are there any other directors present? Not seeing any. We will move on, and I'll just ask the board office to please help me note for the sake of the record if we are joined by other directors throughout the course of the meeting. We will now move into the public comment section. I'll open up public comment to anyone who would like to address this executive committee regarding any topic listed in the published meeting agenda for the current or for the immediately preceding month. If you wish to speak and have not done so, you may raise your virtual hand or press *9 if dialing in by phone. During this time, the committee does not offer any direct comments or responses. However, as always, we encourage you to reach out to the RTD board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. I'm not seeing any hands raised, but I'll ask Mr. Kroll, do we have anyone in attendance who has raised their hand or have we received any email comments?
Hi, Chair Davidson. This is Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office. We do have one individual who has raised their hand who would like to provide public comment. That's Sid Park. And we are also, I'm also able to inform you that we have not received any additional public comment via email in advance of this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. I very much appreciate it. So at this time, I will call on Mr. Park to please provide comments to the committee. I'll just briefly note that you may toggle your mute settings on Zoom or if dialing in *6. Please bear in mind that if by participating in this process, you are being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, you may submit your comments in writing to the board office. Speakers, please begin your remarks by stating your name and you will have 3 minutes to speak. So with that, Mr. Park, would you please unmute yourself and provide comments to the committee?
All right. Hopefully I am unmuted and I am Ms. Sid Park. And I actually sent an email to the RTD board directors and also to several individual members, but I'm going to speak to the topic of the email. There's a low ridership for the RTD, and I had proposed that if we were to provide the incoming refugees and migrants a 1-month free RTD pass with renewal, some nominal renewal fee, $5, $10 a month per adult, something like that, something manageable, giving them access to the RTD how-to video in Spanish that exists, which a part of the Facebook, many of the Facebook groups that are helping support these people have done that and continue to do that, and also how to use Google Maps to find, where your nearest station is. I think it would increase ridership a lot. Once these people get used to that, I'm on many of the Facebook boards and I hear it over and again. We need transportation for these people. And I'm like, we have transportation for these people. It is public transportation. But for some reason, nobody seems to see that. And, the same way that, you can go to Costco and they'll give you a free sample of whatever to encourage you to buy that product, giving these people an opportunity to try it out, giving them a way to use it. And then, I don't know whether expire in a year or whatever. I don't know how y'all program your cards. I think you would end up with a much higher increase of long-term ridership. Eventually, the kids would learn to use it, and ideally, eventually, after a year, whatever, they get jobs. And the people who stay here would continue to use it. So that is my recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Park, and apologies for introducing you incorrectly. Thank you for your comments and your email. Very much appreciated. Mr. Kroll, I see that your hand is up. You're now recognized.
Yeah, Chair Davidson, I just wanted to mention for the record that we did receive Ms. Park's email in advance of our Tuesday board meeting, and we did forward that to the full board. So just wanted to make sure that that was on the record.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll, for noting that for the sake of the record. Also, for the sake of the record, I see that we have been joined by Director Rosenthal. Thank you for joining us, sir. Are there any other participants in the queue that have their hands raised for public comment?
There are not.
Being Mr. Kroll said, thank you, Mr. Kroll. With no further participants in the queue, we will close the public comment period at this time. That will take us to our recommended actions portion of the agenda. There is one recommended action on the agenda this afternoon. This action is for the 2024 committee appointments. This is for the Board of Directors to ratify the 2024 standing committee appointments. Before taking any action on this matter, I'd like to first discuss the committee membership preferences provided by our colleagues, as well as offer a suggested starting point for our discussion. We will then seek consensus on the appointments and bring that forward to the board for ratification at the end of the month. I would like to note before starting this discussion, I know in the packet preferences were published. I would like to briefly address that we have received the resignation of Director Kate Williams. And given that she has tendered her resignation, we will be not appointing her or recommending her for a particular committee at this time. We will address the steps that will follow that after this meeting and in the weeks ahead. With that, as I alluded to, I will discuss a starting point based on the preferences. Rather than go into those preferences in detail, I think we can jump right to where my recommendation is, which I believe aligns very well with the preferences of directors. To be very clear, we have accommodated first and second place requests from every director on the standing committees, and I believe that we have aligned fairly well in these preferences. So I'm going to go ahead and read through the proposed members of each standing committee. I'll first name the Finance and Planning Committee, then the Operations and Safety Committee, and then the Performance Committee, and then I will open it up for discussion. So first, beginning with the Finance and Planning Committee, the directors that I propose, including based on preferences in this committee, is as follows: Director Broom, First Vice Chair Catlin, Director Deschel, Second Vice Chair Geisinger, Secretary Guzman, Director Rusha, and Director Tisdale. For the Operations and Safety Committee, I'll now read off my proposed starting point for those committee members. Again, going in alphabetical order. I would propose Treasurer Bouquet, Director Harwick, Director Rosenthal, Director Rusha, Director Sloan, Director Whitmore, and Director Busick. I will note for the sake of the record that based on preferences, we had previously, my previous starting proposed point included Director Williams. Director Busick has stepped in to fill that. I will also note that this may be something that this board decides to revisit if and when we have a new director as part of this board. Moving to the Performance Committee, I'll now again state in alphabetical order my starting point proposed members of the committee. This would also be 7, and it would be Director Busick, First Vice Chair Catlin. Myself, this is Chair Davidson. Second Vice Chair Geisinger. Secretary Guzman. Director Rosenthal. And Director Tisdale. So at this time, I would like to open the floor for any discussion. And Mr. Kroll, I see you have raised your hand, so I'd like to recognize you, sir.
Director Davidson, thank you for that. I was taking furious notes as you went through there, and if it's an ever point in aid for anyone, I can pull this up on the document as I'm filling it in, if that's helpful, so just let me know. The other thing I'd like to point out is before you actually take any action, just be sure as the chair to call for a motion to appoint these committee members and get a second on that so it can be on the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Kroll. Appreciate that. We will have the discussion, then we will clearly state what the standing committee appointments are, call for a motion, a second, and then proceed from there. Thank you for the help with that. And also for the sake of the record, I see that we are joined by Director Ruscia. Director Ruscia, thank you for joining us. With that, I will open up for discussion for either executive committee members or any other directors who have joined us today that are not on the executive committee. Anyone may speak at this time by raising their virtual hand. Yes, first Vice Chair Catlin, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was trying to keep track of your recommendations, and I just noticed that almost all directors have two committees, with the exception of Directors Harwick, Sloan, and Whitmore. And is that okay with those directors?
Thank you, First Vice Chair Catlin, for noting that. Some of that does have to do with external appointment considerations and looking at what some of the obligations are, as well as some of the preferences that have been communicated to me by some of the directors. I believe that those will be satisfactory to the folks that you mentioned. Other questions or input? Yes, please go ahead, First Vice Chair Catlin.
In that case, I'd like to make a motion to accept the chair's recommendation for committee appointments.
Okay, thank you. And for clarity, I'll just state for the record, this is a motion to accept my proposal for finance and planning being directors Broom, Catlin, Deschel, Geisinger, Guzman, Ruscia, and Tisdale. For operations and safety, directors Bouquet, Harwick, Rosenthal, Ruscia, Sloan, Whitmore, and Busick. And for performance committee, directors Busick, Catlin, Davidson, Geisinger, Guzman, Rosenthal, and Tisdale. That is the motion that First Vice Chair Catlin has made. Is there a second?
Second, Bouquet.
Hearing a motion from First Vice Chair Catlin and a second from Treasurer Bouquet. At this time, I'll ask if there's any further discussion on the motion for those directors that I have named. All right, and with that, I will call for, are there any no votes on this action from the executive committee? Being none, the motion will pass with 5 yes votes, 0 no votes, and passes unanimously to move forward to the full board. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Also, I will note that further communique will follow with regards to external appointments. Next, we'll move to the discussion item portion of our agenda. We do have one discussion item. This is the 2024 Executive Committee Work Plan. At this time, first of all, I'd like to thank the Board Office Executive Manager, Mr. Kroll, for assisting in not only helping to put some of this together, but also helping the board take action on drafting work plans for all of its committees. I think this will very much be a work in progress and will be evolving, given that this is the first year we are doing this. I anticipate we will not be perfect, but I would like this to be living and flexible and inform future boards. So Mr. Kroll, thank you for starting that process. Thank you for your leadership and consideration of the matter. And at this point, I'll turn over the floor to you and ask you to please introduce the item for discussion.
Great. Thank you, Chair Davidson. The packet included a discussion item and an example work plan, or rather draft work plan for the executive committee. I think the goal of today's discussion for you all is, review, and I'm happy to pull up and share what was sent in the packet as you all discuss if that's valuable. But hopefully you all have had a chance to review the draft work plan as circulated. The goal today is to get input from the executive committee and certainly other members of the board who are in attendance. At that point, I would then work with Chair Davidson and any relevant senior staff to amend this work plan and bring it back for your consideration. You really have two options depending on how full your plate is. You can approve your work plan at the subsequent January meeting which is now set for the 24th, or you can approve the work plan at your February meeting. Ideally, this simply tells you all what you are going to discuss and what you are going to take action on and when throughout the course of the next year and into the first couple of meetings of 2025. It is not a rigid document. It is meant to be living and breathing, and hopefully you all will refer back to it as you move throughout the year, and as issues may arise, adjust the work plan accordingly. And with that, Chair, I'm happy to have had that serve as the introduction of this topic and open to discussion and any questions you all may have on this.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. I will assume that all directors have had a chance to review that from the executive committee and have that in front of them. If there are any requests, as we discussed, to share the screen. I thank you for your offer. I'd like to just start out, frame the conversation, and then open up for questions and input from directors. First of all, I would like to thank you for putting together a framework here and for noting the ability to have this be living and breathing and place requests. I do think that it is likely that we will have some adjustments and requests based on the outcome of our board retreat. Much like we did last year, at the board retreat, we discussed some policy goals for the agency and for the board. I anticipate, as we'll discuss in other matters, that will have some presence in this year's retreat as well. So I just want to note that I appreciate the idea that this is living and breathing in its first year, because I do think it will be impacted by our retreat. Second of all, I wanted to note, just thank you for ensuring that we lay out discussion items that are then followed by recommended actions in either subsequent month or months. I think that is the appropriate way to approach that. At this point, I'm going to open the floor to other directors on the executive committee for any questions or discussion or input, additions, deletions to the work plan itself. And I'll go ahead and first recognize the first hand I saw, which is First Vice Chair Catlin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We already do have a minor correction to this work plan, and I too wanted to echo your thoughts about it's really nice to have this framework and template in place, and that'll serve the other committees well. But our January 2nd of 2 meetings, the date will now be changed. And I know Mr. Kroll knows this, but we also need to add an action item regarding the performance committee. Am I correct, Mr. Chair? That it will be
Yes.
an executive committee recommendation to the board regarding the performance.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, thank you, First Vice Chair Catlin, for that. That is the only near-term revision that I see as well, which is that we would need a recommended action at the January 24th, 2024 meeting of the Executive Committee to move forward any recommended actions with respect to the adoption of our General Manager and CEO goals and any distribution between weighted success outcomes, goals, and organizational values. With that, yeah, thank you for that. First Vice Chair Catlin, does that address all of your revisions and comments?
It did.
Thank you. And now Treasurer Bouquet, please.
Thank you, Chair Davidson, and thank you, Mr. Kroll, for getting that all ready for us. I guess my question would be regarding the process of, I love the idea that it's a living, breathing document. It has to be, especially with our board retreat coming up. What would be the process, or how would it kind of look regarding, hey, new items are addressed during our board retreat? How would that kind of add into our working plan as the year went on? Could you dive into that, Mr. Kroll?
Sure. On the first note, given that you all are going to have this retreat in February, I offered 2 potential dates for you all to approve the work plan. One being your second January committee meeting, the other being your February committee meeting. At that point, I would simply recommend that you approve this in February, and that way any items that come out of the retreat can be addressed. I think ideally, you don't want to make this too formal of a process to adjust. If there was something that wanted to be added as the course of the year went on, the chair could add it, and then with the consent of the committee, adjust the work plan. So I would imagine it would just simply be a motion and a second within the committee meeting, and it would be added. The other item that this can be valuable for is to bring up at each committee meeting, not a long discussion, but just a reminder. Hi all, this is the second January committee. At our next committee meeting in February, we are slated to discuss this. And it just kind of keeps everybody on the same page as you all move forward.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Treasurer Bouquet, and thank you, Mr. Kroll. Yes, First Vice Chair Catlin, please.
You mentioned that we could keep this fairly informal. It seems to me that it could be the discretion of the chair of each committee to inform committee members of upcoming events rather than a formal motion and voting on a work plan adjustment. It just seems that maybe we could keep it less formal and more in a management style. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, thank you, First Vice Chair Catlin. Something I'd like to discuss, and Treasurer Bouquet, thank you for your question. Mr. Kroll, your response. I am very much supportive of the idea that we would approve a work plan in February after our retreat, and also as we have a chance to consider how all of the work plans come together with all of the committee chairs, so that we can consider what an overall process is for amending, for adjusting, and for adding to. And directly to that point, one comment that I wanted to make, and thank you, Mr. Kroll, I know we've had a number of conversations about this for including the intersection of other committees, and most notably the one that appears in here for the sake of the record and other directors on something Mr. Kroll and I have discussed is the work of the audit committee. And we will have, as directors may recall, in the formation of the new or not so new anymore, standing audit committee, we did require that the audit committee would re-examine its charter on an annual basis. We recognize that we were not going to get that perfect right away. And there are some things that will need to be addressed concerning the appointment of the chair of the audit committee and so forth. So you will notice that the audit committee member appointment process comes into this committee for a discussion in July that is likely to be an output of things discussed at the audit committee in looking at its charter. And then that there is an anticipated action coming forward with regards to audit committee member appointment and executive position election in November of this year. So Mr. Kroll, thank you for working that in. I think one thing that there's an opportunity to use these work plans for is to look at the intersection of the various committees with executive committee and ultimately with the board. So let's make sure we have an eye on that as these other work plans get worked out from the other committees and identify those additional intersection points. With that, Second Vice Chair Geisinger, I see your hand is up and you are now recognized.
Thank you. Coming to you with COVID this morning, so I'm leaving my camera off. But one thing that Jack and I talked about the other day, I know that the OSA, the state auditor, is looking at onboarding and potential ongoing training for current members, along the lines of the statute. And I think that that is something that I don't think it's in there yet, Jack. I know we talked about it, but I think that that's something we should consider as an executive committee. That's two different things, I guess. Is one is the onboarding and one is continuing annual training. Whether we want to do them and what that would look like.
Yeah, thank you, Second Vice Chair Geisinger. And maybe what we do, I think that's a great idea. And I also think it's important to note the ongoing aspect of that. And so good chance to thank staff, Ms. Johnson, you and your team, as well as board staff for consolidating the videos and helping us have the access to the training that was done for onboarding. I think what we can do is potentially create a repository. So I think there's two items to discuss. There's onboarding of new directors, which I believe will be highly relevant in January 2025. And then there's the ongoing. So why don't we work to find a place before moving this forward to add as a discussion item in a time where it looks like it can fit well into the agenda of the executive committee in the first quarter of this year to discuss the onboarding process and what we might consider there, both for ongoing and new training. So thank you, Second Vice Chair Geisinger, for raising that, and certainly we hope you have an easy COVID experience. Other additions, comments at all on the work plan? And at this time, I'll also open up the floor to any other directors present that are not on the executive committee to please also raise their hand for any items to consider. Okay. Well, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Kroll, for creating this framework for us. I look forward to engaging with the executive committee after our retreat and also throughout January and February. Well, I jumped half a year there to help make any additions to this that we would like. And as always, I invite any director on the committee or not on the committee to please reach out to me directly if there are things that you would like to discuss, and certainly always feel free to reach out to the board office and Mr. Kroll as well. With that, we will move on to other matters. There is one other matter that I want to ensure that we address, which is with regards to the board retreat. So I'd like to discuss what the board would like to get out of the retreat. We don't have to, fully solve this right now, but I want to make sure to start soliciting all the input, gather feedback as we get ready for this retreat. I will touch on date of the retreat at the end of the discussion of the topics itself, as there have been a number of people who have reached out to me with regards to the date that's been calendared. So I just ask let's hold that portion and focus on topics in this first portion of the discussion. So as we've done on an annual basis, we will be having a retreat of the board. And I thank our CEO, our general manager and CEO, Deborah Johnson, and General Counsel Snyder for being willing to join us on that. I would like to discuss what some of the topics are that we'd like to address. I wanted to start by putting up a few topics that I've heard and that I would also propose. It's probably no secret that one of the topics that I believe we should discuss at the retreat with the entire board is agency-wide performance metrics. Currently, we use Net Promoter Score to measure our success outcomes on our strategic priorities. I think in using our strategic priorities as a foundation and as a framework, there's an opportunity for us to engage in a robust dialogue with our general manager and CEO Johnson. And when we talk about topics, Ms. Johnson, I'd like to also invite you to please chime in anywhere you would like as well, and recognizing that this particular item I'm proposing would be a two-way dialogue. This would be a chance to look at key performance indicators, engaging, as Ms. Johnson has suggested in the past, in a robust discussion of what's a leading KPI versus what is a lagging KPI, and also understand where we're going as an agency, look at all of the multi-year plans and initiatives that we currently have adopted or have in front of us. Of course, our comprehensive operational analysis, branded as the SOP, is certainly one that comes to mind. And considering our strategic priorities, what are the types of things that we as a board want to measure that we feel ourselves being measured on? So agency performance metrics, I think, could be a robust and fruitful discussion. I also believe there's an opportunity for us to discuss our communications of what we as a board would like to communicate out to other policymakers that we collaborate with regarding our current realities and regarding our current needs within RTD. This is looking at things like sharing what our revenue diversification working group has learned about our financial situation relative to other agencies, the types of challenges that our frontline employees in particular are experiencing in the delivery of service and in their hard work to make the transit environment welcoming for customers, communicating our needs on housing and land use, which is becoming an increasing topic of focus by our partners in the state legislature and otherwise. And I believe there's an opportunity for us to talk about our communication strategies, policymaker to policymaker. Additionally, I think, as always, discussing our policy agenda and priorities is appropriate, as we did last year. We can perhaps tighten that discussion, as this is the same board, and just sort of revisit some of the things we discussed last year. And then also, I believe there's an opportunity for us to talk about election and candidate recruitment, not only to address the immediate upcoming needs, given that we're in an election year, but also help set precedent in the future for directors communicating internally, externally their intent to run for re-election or not, and of course, communicating out to the public any positions that will be open. So those were the topics I had just sketched down of things I think I've heard people talk about: agency-wide performance metrics, how we communicate RTD's reality and needs to policymakers, revisiting our policy priorities from the prior year, and looking at what we do about election and candidate recruitment and awareness around our board. So with that, I'd like to open up for discussion to anybody here, including Ms. Johnson, given that I had mentioned your involvement in one of those topics, and I think we'd invite your participation in all of those topics. And let's discuss what we want to see. Treasurer Bouquet, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair Davidson. I know you touched on a little bit regarding just the communication process of funding diversification, and then the other thing was a welcoming transit environment. And again, this is me as a policymaker hearing from my constituents regarding that of what is our process, what is our progress, basically where we're at when it comes down to creating a welcoming transit environment. A lot of folks down in the local level down here in District G aren't aware of kind of where our goals are ultimately when it comes down to. So for instance, when we think of, light rail and trying to have another crew member on for either fare enforcement or for security purposes, I think that would be an excellent topic just to talk about when it comes down to what progress we've actually made, and or the communication of that progress that's actually happened. And yeah, I think that would be a major thing to talk about. But
thank you, Treasurer Bouquet. I think definitely, ways that we can think about what needs to be escalated at the policy level on welcoming transit environment. I appreciate that input, and we'll give some thought in framing around a topic. And Ms. Johnson, I see that you raised your hand, your hand during the remarks there, and wondering if you have any input you'd like to offer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, all. Deborah Johnson, General Manager and CEO. I just wanted to provide a clarification to a comment that was made by Director Bouquet. When we look at light rail transit, we do not have second crew members. I want to be very clear. We operate commuter rail, which is under the auspices of the Federal Railroad Administration. And as we talk about light rail, that's under the auspices of the Federal Transit Administration. Recognizing that on light rail, we do have a security presence, and we use transit security officers as fare enforcement personnel. I wanted to ensure for the record that we qualify, because in this instance, those details matter as relates to what's going on. So thank you. That's what I wanted to impart, and I'll allow the directors to continue the conversation, and I will offer up my thoughts relative to the topics after I've heard everybody else provide their input. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Very much appreciate the clarification there. And Treasurer Bouquet, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, Yeah, wasn't trying to assert that we do have a second crew officer on the light rail, but I think it's more the goal of the actual security presence there. Not saying that's necessarily a goal of ours of actually having another person on light rail or not. But I think it is an important topic for us actually to discuss again, that we walked away with 4 major policy goals when it came down to our February retreat from. Well, our retreat from last year, I forgot what month it was in. But one of the things we did talk about was the conversation regarding creating a welcoming transit environment and what progress we can ultimately communicate back to our communities, and I think that is an important topic that we talk about. I think we all are passionate on the board about having a welcoming transit environment. When it really comes down to it is, I just want us to solidify that at our board retreat of this is a goal that we have as policy directors. We want it to be a welcoming transit environment. We want it to be a safe transit environment. I think just adding that extra layer onto our board retreat would be significant. If it is through, hey, how do we communicate that back better to our communities? Or is it, to the extent of, hey, are we exploring what is the process that we're actually making when there is progress that's happening? And how do you measure said progress when it comes down to creating a welcoming transit environment? So those would be my comments.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Treasurer Bouquet, for that. And I think this is also an area, where we discuss our policy goals and also communication strategies, an area that specifically around welcoming transit environment, which is one of the, I know, 3 major initiatives that Ms. Johnson, you and your team are looking at. Would love to engage your input and feedback. Certainly one thought that comes to mind for me in what we would discuss at the retreat is what can we do as elected policymakers to engage with other elected policymakers to share out what it is that we need in those areas, Treasurer Bouquet. And, just this morning on the governor's State of the State, I heard him say very clearly that one of his objectives, and he believes the legislative objectives, will be to give any transit entities or agencies in the state, quote, the tools and structure that they need to perform their jobs. And so I think there are areas that we want to make sure we're highlighting and communicating, given that we represent RTD. What are those tools that are needed? And certainly I think welcoming transit environment is a major component. Other comments, retreat topics, ideas, feedback on some of the things that I have summarized that I've heard? Yes, Secretary Guzman, please.
I do believe that one of the things that this board probably needs to discuss is where we stand as a board with any idea of changing the governance structure of RTD. Given the history of our board, coming from an appointed board in 1969 to a statewide decision that required the directors to be elected to where we are today. There's been a lot of other discussion going on, but we can certainly take a stand on where we see things at. I know that gives people pause because it does in some way bind future boards, but we do have to stand on one side or the other and make a decision for ourselves on how we see this board and its responsibilities to each of our constituency groups. So that's something that should be worked on. And we'll have to figure out what that sounds like, what that looks like, but interference with the governance of this agency in any method other than the last one, which was a statewide vote, I think would be folly. And I think that we as a board do a lot of work to make sure that this agency is running and running well. And we are entrusted with that responsibility by our electorate. And so I think that there's something to be said there. There's a historical lesson to learn about this board and why it exists the way it does. So I think that should be worthy of discussion at our retreat.
Thank you, Secretary Guzman. I appreciate that very much. And, certainly one thing that I'll state just from a personal standpoint that I've struggled with, that there's nothing really to react to at this time. And certainly I'm hoping that as the legislature is considering a bill concerning RTD specifically and transit, I would love to see something to react to that we can then discuss as a board and view our policy on. Secretary Guzman, I see you raise your hand. Before I continue my remarks and open for others, I'd like to recognize you again.
I just want to be clear, it doesn't need to be a reactive message. That's a message that we can just simply state, period. It doesn't have to be in reaction to anything, but I think that there's an education piece. Part of your discussion earlier and one of the topics was to discuss elections and candidacy. And so I think when we clarify what our story is as a board and we present the historical record, we own that narrative. We are responsible for the guardianship of that knowledge and presenting it out to the public for the purposes of why we're here. And so I think that that's an opportunity to perhaps handle two birds with one stone, and be able to do two things at once. Whether there's something to react to from anywhere else or not, we as a board have the right, I think, and the responsibility to have a standing opinion about our existence and our composition and why we're here. So that's just my thought. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Secretary Guzman. One thing I was jotting down as I was kind of reflecting on your comments is that, you know, one thing I would hope to do in communicating out to other policymakers is not just the problems we have, but why we are where we are and where we actually are, you know, communicating things. I mean, and taking the revenue diversification as an example, we've learned some things about, you know, our funding per capita, for example, and our some of our costs and how those fit. And I think finding ways to communicate those is something that work group will be working on, and we need to elevate to the board. Similarly, as you're saying, there are reasons why this board is elected. There is a history as to why it went from appointed and to elected and why we are who we are. And I always believe that it's important when you set out for solutions to know what problems you're solving for. And given that, you know, there are different perspectives on what this bill that we're hearing about is solving for, it would be appropriate for us to frame up who we are. And perhaps one way to do that, Secretary Guzman, is to include in our list of current states who we are, why we are. You know, perhaps we can discuss what and how we would want to communicate that aspect of, as you say, our being. Thank you very much. Other comments, feedback? Yeah, Second Vice Chair Geisinger, please.
Just in that regard, since it's coming up about what we've been getting done and you know what we're moving forward, I just wanted to mention that we have been working with Stuart Summers and others to draft an op-ed that will go from Eric and from me as we change the chairship, and I think it should be ready to get out to the board. I need to check with Stuart today or tomorrow morning, and then we'll be sending it probably to the Denver Post soon after, just letting people know that's coming with some of these issues. Thanks.
Thank you, Second Vice Chair Geisinger. Yeah, and just to further elaborate for everybody, and a huge thank you to Mr. Summers for his work on that. This is an opportunity to communicate out some of the challenges from last year and successes of last year and some of the challenges we see in this year coming forward. And as Second Vice Chair Geisinger noted, will be coming forward and does not speculate on anything that might be coming toward this board, but instead states where we are and what we're facing. Thank you for those comments. Yes, Ms. Johnson, please go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to qualify and manage expectations for all that are assembled and listening to the comments relative to an op-ed. The steps contained with the process is that we have to send to the Denver Post and allow them to read it to decide if they're going to publish it. So I want to ensure that everybody knows that this isn't a fait accompli. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Johnson, for the clarity around that. Other comments? And at this time, Ms. Johnson, you had also mentioned you were interested in providing some comments as directors have. Not seeing a lot more comments. If there's anything you'd like to add, please feel free.
Yes, thank you very kindly. Appreciate the opportunity to offer up some thoughts. The topics as described, I think, are very meaningful and look forward to engage recognizing as we use the term key performance indicators and we talk about agency performance, it's quite important to keep in mind, as I indicated during the course of the special board meeting on Tuesday evening, that as a transit agency, we do have key performance indicators that we must have relative to ensuring that we're providing information to the National Transit Database in order to be eligible for federal funding, specifically formula funding under Section 5307. And so with that as a backdrop, wanted to ensure that everybody had that understanding going forward when we talk about agency performance and as we use the nomenclature around key performance indicators. More specifically, as we look to engage on this topic, we want to ensure that it is collaborative in the sense that from a staff level, we engage on the strategic plan to the point that was raised by Treasurer Bouquet relative to what might we see and how do we communicate out on the process of a welcoming transit environment, that as staff, we do have threshold criteria relative to key initiatives that enable us to determine how we're moving the needle on those areas. So I wanted to ensure that you all were cognizant of that in the sense that that needs to be brought into the discussion. Because I believe it's complementary. And if anything, I think the underlying issue here is how we can better equip you with information so you can be highly communicative with your policymakers, because we recognize that there's different messages for different audiences and what we may lean into to deem to be appropriate relative to a welcoming transit environment. I would be remiss not to state the most critical factor is making an environment that is welcoming for our employees, because without our employees, there's no way to provide service to customers. So we have to ensure that they're at the ready to provide the level of service that we have hired them to do. And we need to ensure that we're focusing on the retention efforts in order to do that, to bring to fruition an environment in which everyone can thrive in. Thank you very much for the opportunity to offer those comments, sir.
Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson. I think very well said, and a lot of what would be helpful, as you said, I think it hit the nail on the head with different messages for different audiences, and us thinking about what that means as we communicate with other policymakers is very helpful. So not seeing any other discussion, I'd like to just please again open up for invitation, not just to me, but the executive committee here, if you would please communicate with your colleagues and certainly invite all directors to reach out to us and provide any input on the retreat topics. I think we can do some work to get ready. And also as it relates to those agency performance metrics, please encourage other directors and please ourselves, let's consider how is it that we are measured? How do we hear from policymakers, from customers, from our constituents? Do you feel you're being measured? And we can work together on how to translate that. I see Director Rucha, you have raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a comment related, I think, to policy, and I don't know if this is the right time in our agenda. So if I'm out of order, I apologize. It was may I go ahead? It might also come up at the retreat.
Oh yeah, please.
Okay, thank you.
Please, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to flag for the executive committee that with the passing of House Bill 1110, all governments are required to ensure that all digital communications to the public are fully ADA accessible and have a plan for digital accessibility. And that deadline set by the legislature was July 1st, 2024. And so digital accessibility includes things like websites, applications, PDF forms, etc. This is already required under Title II of the ADA, but this affords a state remedy for noncompliance, which is a polite way of saying liability. I know that GM CEO Johnson and her team have a lot of this policy in place. And while the law doesn't require the legislative body to approve a policy or that a local government make their plan public, I think we'd all benefit from formalizing some of this. It would benefit us as a team and our constituents, but also demonstrate leadership in that area, relative to other transit agencies and other local governments who are going through that same process. I did discuss this with GM CEO Johnson last fall, and so I just wanted to bring it to the executive to see if there's an opportunity to work on this either through this committee board retreat, or if it's better suited in operations, maybe that can be part of the operations work plan. But I also noticed that there are some things under the board's auspices that might not meet that standard. For example, our board packets are frequently inaccessible to those who use screen readers. So the state also provides a pretty comprehensive checklist and a lot of resources for local governments, and that we could utilize. So I just wanted to bring this up. And again, that deadline is July 1st, 2024. And I just wanted to kind of put on the record, bring to the committee and see if there was any thoughts about how we as a body could be proactive in leadership on this issue, and also, work with our external partners in maybe formalizing something that I know we already have much of this in place.
Thank you very much, Director Ruscia, for the comments. Thank you. Very well stated and understood on the issue, and thank you for raising it. I think the idea of formalizing is certainly an interesting one that we should bring before the board. I think when we visit policy goals at the retreat, let's take a look at that. Let's discuss that, discuss where that fits. I think, as you mentioned, that may be operations and safety, that may be executive committee, but let's talk to the board about where that fits. And as we look at what our policy goals are, I think that would be a great place to put it. So I've taken that down if as a topic to include as a sub-bullet in policy discussions at the board retreat.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Ruscia. Other comments about the retreat topics? Okay, seeing none, I did want to note that the board office had pulled for a date, and the retreat has been scheduled for Saturday, February 24th at the Studio Loft. I did want to note that it's been brought to my attention by several individuals that not everyone had this as a hold on their calendar, having had February 10th as a hold on the calendar. Mr. Kroll, I wanted to just engage with you. We can communicate together. I wanted to just communicate at this time that I will work with the board office to reach out to all board members to ensure alignment of schedules. And we will just make sure that we have this communicated out. At this time, the retreat is scheduled for Saturday, February 24th at the Studio Loft. That is the plan, to keep that. But I do want to be very proactive in reaching out to everybody who had scheduling concerns and those who have communicated with me. So Mr. Kroll, if we could please work together to reach out to all directors, that would be wonderful. And perhaps there's some things we can do to consider the start and end time of that retreat. So I'll open up just if there's any questions or discussion regarding that date, regarding that timing. But again, a commitment on my part to work with Mr. Kroll to make sure we maximize attendance, which is always challenging with the number of people we have, but we'll do our very best. Director Ruscia, I see your hand came up as I was speaking. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I had an idea not related to the location or timing, but rather publication. So we do put this in our 2-week calendar, and it is an open meeting. And given that we have candidates for RTD office right now, I wonder if it would be appropriate to just, I apologize, my dog. If we could notify them that we have a retreat, not to, if somebody wants to show up in person, that they can under the law, but, we generally put this on Zoom as well. And I just think that would be very informative for candidates and anyone interested running for RTD to see what that process looks like. So I just wanted to put that out there as an idea, just maybe a little additional nudge. And while we're at it, also just remind them how they can attend meetings virtually or in person for our regular board and committee meetings as well.
Thank you very much, Director Ruscia. I will commit to do some offline consideration of that. One thing I want to consider is just how we communicate and ensuring that we maintain the quality of how we communicate out, the meeting being public. I hear the request, and we'll give some consideration to that, and very much appreciate that. First Vice Chair Catlin, please go ahead.
Excuse me. Thank you. To Director Ruscha's point, there has been precedent set for that. 5 years ago now, when I was seeking appointment for this board to replace Director Francone, there were other candidates for that position, and we were invited to attend the board retreat, which I did, and it was very helpful and very informative. So I just wanted to let you know, Mr. Chair, that has occurred in the past, and I think it was really helpful for preparing for an interview for being a candidate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, any other discussion on timing topics or anything related to the board retreat? Okay, are there any other matters that anybody on the committee has to bring forward? Yes, First Vice Chair Catlin.
Thank you. I just wanted to know if Mr. Kroll had received any communication regarding the invitation from DEN to tour their project that was opening. Stacy Stegman sent out an invitation to elected officials, and I, for one, am interested in going. There were a number of times that were offered, and I just wanted to know what other directors had in mind, and perhaps we could go as one body. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman,
Yes, please
sorry,
go ahead.
I do not know whether Mr. Kroll received the invitation from Stacy. I'm happy to forward that to him, what we received. I actually did go on the 10th. Director Rosenthal had originally RSVP'd and then was unable to go. I'd highly encourage going. The work that they have done at DEN is incredible. We saw what it looked like while it was still under construction. Now that it's completed, the movement and the way that it will move people through the airport, through the terminal, is going to be really interesting. It was a great opportunity to ask about how that will affect arrival at the A-line end of the terminal, because this is the northwest end of it. And so it's a wealth of information. It's a 45-minute tour. You walk through everything. You get to see what's going on there. So I would highly suggest signing up and going. I apologize. I thought that went through the board office and they knew. I just signed up and went because I had the day free. So it wasn't to snub anybody or not. I just had the opportunity, but I would have really highly suggested, if it's possible for everybody to go, to check it out so you know what's going on.
Yeah, thank you, Secretary Guzman, for sharing the experience there. I had received the invitation as well, have not yet been on a tour, but thank you for sharing the experience there. First Vice Chair Catlin, please go ahead.
This is another matter. I received a request from E470 board, and this is with regard to external appointments, and I'm sure that there are other entities as well that are asking for letters of representation from the chair. So they're on that right now, and so I guess we can expect that we probably need to act on the external appointments fairly soon, and then send out those letters of representation shortly thereafter.
Thank you very much, First Vice Chair Catlin. I do have a draft of the external appointments. There were some adjustments to be made given the resignation of Director Williams, and we will be able to communicate that out today. And I see that Mr. Kroll, you have raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, just to address the two other matters that Director Catlin brought forward, I did not receive that email from DEN, although Directors Guzman and Ruscha have been kind enough to forward it to me now. We'd be happy to get something out to the full board to remind them of these opportunities. We in the board office are aware of the letters that need to go out, and once I work to to get the information from Director Davidson regarding these external liaison appointments, we will get those out post haste.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll, for both of those, for disseminating the DEN invitation, as well as for the assistance with the letters to external entities. With that, other matters to discuss? I do have one final note, which is that the regularly scheduled executive committee meeting, as has already been discussed, has been moved from Thursday, January 25th to Wednesday, January 24th. Same time, same place, just a different day of the week on January 24th. This is to accommodate scheduling conflicts, given the important matter that will come forward concerning an action from performance. So I thank you for everybody for your flexibility and willingness to support that change. With that, I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move, Bouquet.
So move.
All right, I've got Bouquet and Guzman first and second there. And with that, we will adjourn the executive committee meeting as of 1:01 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Thank you for joining this afternoon. Please, everybody, take care and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye.